podcast. Here we go. Hello, hello. Sami, hello.
Around the world.
And around the block. Around the block and around the world. This is where we discuss, debate, deliberate all things diabetes. Representing type 2, my name is Dobie Maxwell. Representing type 1, vivacious, effervescent,
always in the know.
Are you in the know today? It's Miss Sami Parker.
Heck yeah, I'm always in the know.
She's complicated. We're going to talk about complications today. Today's episode of JMT is brought to you by the Diabetes app. What is it, Sami? A free social community app.
Social community app that brings together type 1 and type 2 diabetics.
That would be you and me, plus their supporters. Hopefully I have at least one. You got many. Find community, resources, and
Sami and me
on the Diabetes app. Sami, once again, when we have guests, we get the biggest ones there are. This one is absolutely special, and I'll let you introduce this lady.
Yes, I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Sandra Sobel. Hello, Sandra.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Sami.
Thank you for coming on. I think I don't even know how I got into contact with you. No, I do, but I don't even remember. I just remember thinking of you when we wanted to talk about diabetes complications. And I was like, Dr. Sobel. And I was like, I have to message her.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy you did.
So thank you so much for coming on. But it's so awesome because diabetes complications is obviously a huge area and very, very, very prevalent. And I think it's a fear for many, something a lot of people don't even know necessarily about, and kind of just, it would be great to shed light to on how to prevent them in the best ways. So we're very excited.
Well, I'm happy to talk about it. Absolutely.
I got to say, it fears me as a type 2. I know probably shouldn't be in this competition. When I first heard about it, the complications, it frightened me to death. And I thought, you get the diagnosis and you think a week later, you're going to get all the worst parts. So hopefully we can soften it a little bit for people listening and just make it, how can I say, human?
Well, if I can add into, just to start, like you said, to soften it also, I remember very distinctly, and it's stuck with me ever since. I was at a conference, so the Endocrine Society conference, and they offered a pre-conference specifically on type 1 diabetes. And because it's so complex and there's so many things that we need to discuss, not only like the treatment with medicines, but also the life experience. And so a speaker came up and she's like, true or false? Diabetes is the number one cause of kidney disease and kidney failure and amputations. And so, as you can imagine, the majority of individuals said true. And she's like, it's actually false. It's poorly controlled diabetes is the number one cause. So sometimes just getting the diagnosis, immediately people go to the fear of complications. But what we're going to get into when we speak is just like, how can we prevent those complications? The diagnosis does not equal complications.
So can we start out by kind of like defining what diabetes complications are?
Absolutely. So when we think of diabetes complications, we think of it in two categories in general. So one is called microvascular. And what microvascular means is when it affects the small, so micro vessels, which is vascular. So when it's affecting the small vessels, and then macrovascular, which are the big vessels within our bodies. So some examples of microvascular complications include diabetic retinopathy, and I'll explain what that is in a little more detail, but it affects the small blood vessels in the retina, as well as diabetic nephropathy. So it affects the small blood vessels in the kidneys, which are responsible for filtering our blood. And then diabetic neuropathy, which is affecting the sensation, the blood vessels that supply the nerves in our bodies. And then if we talk about macrovascular complications, that's when we're really thinking about cardiovascular, so heart complications, cerebrovascular, which is the brain, and then also peripheral arterial disease, so the arteries in our legs, okay, and the blood flow to the extremities, the legs and the arms. So those are the categories of complications that we consider each time that we're having conversations with our patients, microvascular and macrovascular complications.
Got it. That helps a lot. Well, first off, how did you even get into endocrinology?
I'm one of those like nerds from my whole entire life. Ever since I was like 7 years old, I really wanted to be a doctor, and I was tunnel visioned on that. I never considered anything else. And so I was always very like science oriented, and so was thrilled to get into medical school. And once I got on the floors, I rotated with the endocrine team, and getting to see patients in the hospital who had endocrine disease. And the one patient that sparked my interest was someone who came in with a really overactive thyroid called Graves' disease, which is also incidentally an autoimmune condition, much like type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. And so I just seeing how cool, calm, and collected the endocrine team was, and how they could identify what it was that was causing it, and how to replace, or even in her instance, try to turn down the volume of that hormone that was causing her medical condition. I was like, wow, people can really do that and feel a lot better. So that sparked my interest. And then as I pursued endocrinology, it was really the diabetes population. And I'm not saying that just because I'm on this podcast, but that's been my passion ever since, because there's always a story. And it's not like just a quick fix. This is a life condition. And there are so many variables involved, from nutrition, from exercise, stress, from sleep. And it just changes day to day, and everyone's experience is different. And so learning about these experiences from my patients really fascinate me. So I've learned so much from my patients. And then I also seek out more of the information and the technologies and the sophistication of the therapies we can now provide compared to even just 10, 15 years ago is vastly different. We just celebrated 100 years of when insulin was discovered. So within 100 years, how much has come in this field is really, to me, I geek out over it. So I really, really enjoy it.
Wow, that's so awesome. Me and Dobie always say, because complications, it's scary. And so it's really cool when you have somebody as passionate as you who's in the diabetes field and, helping clients and patients and basically help them take charge of their health, because I haven't had the best luck with endocrinologists. So it's very refreshing to talk to somebody who's so passionate about it.
I have a question. What is the story of success of one of your patients? Because everybody, you look at the fearful things and the bad things. What is this patient that you had that really overcame it and has a happy, positive story?
There are so many. And I think when I reflect back on these stories of success, really what it comes down to, and it also pulls a little bit from Sami's unfortunate experience, is like, it's not uncommon that you'll hear that individuals don't have the best experience with their diabetes teams. And I'm sure there's a variety of reasons for that. But I know, especially in the transition from the pediatric world to the adult world, I get a lot of joy out of those interactions, because typically in the pediatric world, the parents are heavily involved. And it's necessary that they're heavily involved, right? Especially depending on when someone was diagnosed with diabetes and what the resources are, right? But in visits, also, it's frequently a conversation between the physician or other people of the medical team and the parents. And of course, the patient, the child is also involved, but a lot of it still goes back with parents. And so when they come to the adult world, I say, welcome, you're an adult now. And just so you know, I'm going to be talking to you. You can still bring your parents. Absolutely. Bring your support team. I am so thrilled for them to hear what we talk about. But the conversation is between me and you. And I think what I've seen is that when people have the opportunity to be engaged in their care and not just be a bystander, but more of a participant, that's where this success comes out. So I don't live with type 1 diabetes. I have a lot of patients that do. And so just hearing their stories about all the things that they have to consider on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, what time is it of the day? What did I just eat 2 hours ago? Oh, I want to go for a walk because it's so nice, but my blood sugar arrow is pointing in this direction. Maybe I can't right now. Just all these things that a lot of us who don't live with diabetes take for granted. And so being able to share those experiences that patients have given me with other individuals, and they realize, I think the patient realizes, I'm part of this community of individuals who also live with this condition. And I can really resonate with the experiences that other people have. So if I can introduce them to other patients or to groups or, social media individuals who are able to share with their experience, I think then it relieves the burden that a lot of times when we just focus on numbers and the labs, it creates this pressure and burden to be perfect. But once there's this understanding, variability is expected and that's part of the condition, but we're going to try to keep the variability to a minimum. And when the person's engaged in that conversation and can ask questions and understand where that recommendation is coming from, then I've seen A1Cs improve without me having to change carb ratios or correction factors or basal by much, because it's now like, oh, now I understand. Like now that makes sense. And so behaviors can change and really improve care as simply as that.
Yeah. It's so tricky too, because I think also depending on like your care of like who your endocrinologist is or who you're going to, if they're passionate about it, if they're able to connect to you, relate to you, and even as an adult, it has a lot to do with, I think, the complications too. Because I had an endocrinologist before, and I said this in an episode before, but it made me not like, it's really, I mean, I would go in and it was like they were instilling the living fear of God in me. And I would be like, oh my gosh. And so I think that's why, like with complications too, it's so scary. I don't view it now because I feel like I found the tricks for my own diabetes because I did it during COVID. But before I was really fearful of it because I didn't know. I just thought, you get told one thing versus we don't need to focus on the complication.
Yeah. And there's different styles to communication or styles to try to motivate people to take ownership of their care or get better, or at least strive for better glucose control. And I feel confident saying that the scare technique, well, A, isn't helpful, but B, is also more of an older mindset of how we used to communicate. And what I've been happy to see, not to say it doesn't exist anymore, but I do feel like that's less of the focus now. But the scare technique, of course, when you hear your physician or medical diabetes care team talk about, oh, you could go blind, oh, you could end up on dialysis, or oh, your feet could be cut, that's scary. And that also does not allow for any opportunity of engagement, right? Like you think of that and you shut down. But I also don't want to minimize, like, of course, like all of this, when we have conversations about trying to keep glucose levels as steady and as a goal as we can, it is to make sure that we prevent complications. And you heard me say earlier, it is true that uncontrolled diabetes is the number one cause of kidney failure and needing dialysis. And so, like, how does that even happen in uncontrolled diabetes? And so, like, if we're starting from the top down, you hear like diabetic retinopathy. So we have tons of blood vessels in the retina. And in uncontrolled diabetes, then there is this growth of these tiny vessels, capillaries in the retina, because it's trying to make sure that enough blood is reaching the retina. But these tiny blood vessels are not strong. They're very leaky and they can bleed. And so when you go and have an eye exam, essentially what's being checked for are these hemorrhages or bleeding in the retina. And so, the recommendation is at least once a year having a dilated eye exam where you can check in the back of the eye. And individuals who have better control of their glucose levels are at less risk of this complication. We have a study that was done in individuals with type 1 diabetes. And this is sort of like where it stemmed from, that like a lot could be done from a control perspective to help prevent diabetes complications, the microvascular complications. And so this study was the DCCT study. It was a fascinating study because up until then, that the standard of care, this was the 1980s, late 1980s, which wasn't very long ago. And I'm not saying that because I was in the 1980s, but at any rate, so the standard of care was not to check your blood sugar multiple times a day. It was only to take insulin maybe twice a day. There was no standard of, oh, what is my blood sugar target? Like it was a lot of checking urine. And if it was high, it was just high, but it wasn't a number. And so these blood glucose meters had just come out on the market and they're like, well, it can give a number. And initially the medical field was like, well, patients shouldn't be checking their numbers at home. That's just going to create too much confusion. But others were like, no, I mean, I want to know what my number is. And maybe by knowing what my number is, I can adjust my insulin dose or decide what to eat. So that's what this study focused on. was those intensive control, which meant multiple checks a day and adjusting your insulin accordingly, versus those who did the standard care, checked their blood sugar once a day, didn't adjust their insulin necessarily accordingly, and they followed that. Their goal was to get the A1C below 6% and compare. But that was too hard to do without causing a lot of low blood sugar or hypoglycemia. But so the intensive controlled group, they were able to get their A1C below 7%. And they had prevention of diabetic retinopathy. They had better kidney function and also prevented diabetic neuropathy. So that's where all this came from that study of this A1C, which I'm sure a lot of people with type 1 and type 2 know, this goal of less than 7%.
Did you know that people with diabetes are more likely to experience foot complications? That includes callus, dry skin, fungus, and so much more. I know what you're thinking, gross, but I've experienced it firsthand. As I've been walking lately and getting my 10,000 steps in, I've noticed how much it's affected my feet. Dry skin, calluses, the works. Therefore, I want to tell you about G-Wall, the world's most comprehensive line of foot care. I've been using their Lipidro cream, which helps improve the barrier protection and moisture of the skin, which ensures that I keep all my toes. So let's make sure your toes don't fall off either. Go check out G-Wall at GWallFootCare.com. That's G-E-H-W-O-L. G-Wall. Not to make a joke of it, but don't walk, run. Get your G-Wall products now. The Diabetes app is an online community platform that was created to help people living with diabetes find support and information in one spot.
On the Diabetes app, you can join groups and connect with other people all over the world and find tips that actually make a difference.
And now, while you're using the app, you can collect points and earn rewards.
Wait, you're confusing me. What do you mean?
What I mean is the Diabetes app now gives you points anytime you like, comment, or post. You can collect these points and exchange them for rewards. We're talking promo codes, accessories, and more free gifts.
Whoa, I like the sound of that. So you're saying I can earn free rewards just for doing what I already do?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Keep using the Diabetes app, connect with others, find tips, and get rewarded for doing so. Sandra, this is all fascinating information. Now, are there any tips that has type 1 or type 2? I don't want to leave our, we're 90%, sorry, we're the silent majority in this podcast here. Any tips that we can do to avoid the complications? I just don't want to focus on that. Obviously, we want to talk about it, but we don't want to get there. We want to take the high road, take the happy road.
Absolutely. So the goal is to prevent complications. And so definitely having diabetes controlled, so the blood sugar numbers in range. And so what does that mean? Just so people can put like a number to the A1C, 7% A1C is equal to an average blood sugar of 154. Now, everybody will have their own personalized targets, and that's why it's really important to speak with your medical team. But if you're able to safely maintain your glucose numbers below 150, then you will have an A1C less than 7% each and every time you go and have a blood sugar check. But also remember, it's not how low can you go, right? Because we know also how incredibly dangerous hypoglycemia is. Being mindful of the foods that you eat, good quality foods, being comfortable bolusing for the food that you're eating. And it doesn't mean it has to be perfect each time because there's a lot of variables that go in there, but certainly bolusing for the food, giving yourself the insulin that you need when you eat, and also movement, body, right? Like when you move, that helps with your blood sugar control too. And it has additional benefits of you not necessarily needing insulin to help lower your blood sugar. How many people go for a walk and they can see that their blood sugars come down. Also, stress management techniques, right? That's important to help with blood sugar control. And so trying to keep your blood sugars in the normal range without these wide fluctuations. And what's going to be really interesting in the next couple of years is we're learning more about what's called glucose variability. And already what we see is that it's not good to have wide variability because, we can make an A1C less than 7% by having glucoses in the 50s and then 200s, but that's not the point. I'd much rather have someone with a glucose of 155, but it fluctuates between 140 and 160.
I say like time in range.
Time in range, exactly. And now with the CGM, Sami, there's so much data
it's so great
that we are collecting. I completely agree with you. It's been life-changing.
Yeah.
Kind of like your bowling average, you don't want to have a 50, 200. when I was steady bowling average, steady blood sugar. I'm from the Midwest, so are you, Sandra. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
It's true though, because I mean, even for me, like sometimes I'll go so hot. It's just like I'll be resistant. It'll spike really high and I'm like, ah. And then I go on a walk and it just plummets down and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like crap.
Yes.
Because it's so much variability. And I'm like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
this is not fun, not fun.
Yeah. And also sleep. I don't know, Sammy, if you've noticed any differences in your blood sugar tracings, depending on like
Yes.
a night where you don't get enough sleep, that can really affect your blood sugars the next day.
What would you say is the best amount of sleep?
So the best amount of sleep, they've actually studied this, and the recommendation is between 7 and 9 hours of sleep is the best. And that's also because a lot of hormonal secretion is happening at nighttime. And so you want to make sure that that's optimized. People who don't get enough sleep tend to have more insulin resistance, tend to also have more difficulty losing weight. So yeah, 7 to 9 hours.
I'm trying to get myself to sleepwalk so I can get my exercise and my sleep in at the same time. Kind of, budget my time a little better so I'll have more time to do podcast
Pretty
work
smart,
with
pretty
Sami.
smart, though.
I'm working on it. I'll get back to you.
Let me know how that goes.
Okay, I will.
Only he would. I'm like, only Dobie would.
We got to
Nobody
keep
else.
it a little bit light because these are heavy topics. I don't mean to joke about them at all because they are very serious, and we really appreciate you taking time to do it. Again, I know that's the first thing I thought, and I know I'm a type 2, but you have diabetes, within a minute, oh my gosh, complications. Here comes dialysis, here comes amputation, here comes blindness. Those are 3 huge things within minutes after hearing I had diabetes. I know that's not how it works, but thank you for clarifying.
I've had doctors that have said to me, oh, you're in your coverage. I'm like, huh? I'm like, well, you have like a 10-year coverage. I'm like, what? And one of them was like, well, I guess 7 years, but you're kind of out of that. And they're like, so you better start like getting it together. And I was like,
Yikes.
I was like, I'm out of 7 years. What does that mean?
Exactly. No. And I think I think it's important for people to realize they have a lot more control than they realize. And there's going to be days which are crappy, right? And
yeah, 1,000%.
But the goal is to be mindful of your nutrition choices, really get moving, using the medicines and understanding your trends. And once you get that groove going, the majority of your days are going to be with your blood sugars at goal. Will there be times that it's unexplained and it goes really high and really low? Of course, it will be.
Yeah. And those days I'm just like, today is not my day.
Correct.
Got the salty sugars.
Got the salty sugars. That's what I call them, Sandra.
Salty sugars. Yes, exactly.
Can't always fix it.
I have a question for you. What have you learned being a person with not diabetes, with dealing with diabetes people for so long? Have you learned anything that you could pass along to maybe somebody listening that doesn't have it, that loves, married to a person with diabetes?
Yes.
It's a team effort is what I'm saying.
It's absolutely a team effort. I have learned so much from my patients with type 1 diabetes, and I'm so grateful for everything that they share with me just from a personal basis and the experiences of living with type 1 diabetes. When looping was coming out, that was brand new. And so they taught me like, oh yeah, we have groups which we support each other for those individuals who are interested in looping. And so, I was able to really research that and present it to my division and be like, hey guys, people want technology now that really fits their needs. And sometimes it takes a long time waiting for the FDA to approve things, but so, people understand the risks and they're willing to take the risks and they've seen that it works for them. And so how can we safely support our patients? The one thing that I also know is sometimes there's within the medical field, and not necessarily in endocrinology, but maybe too, there's this thought like, oh, once you have type 1, everyone should be on a pump. And so what I learned too is that
I'm not on a pump.
Right? So there you go. What I learned is that also it's okay to go between the two. Like sometimes you're on the pump and you just get sick of it.
Tired of it.
I don't want it. So you take a holiday. You go to your injections. And so what I learned is the pump is not the answer for everybody.
No.
Some people love their pump and some people don't want it attached to them. When I speak with my patients, I share that with them. I said, if you're on a pump, I'm like, how's it going? And they're like, oh, it's so frustrating. They'll say, do you want to take a break? And they look at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, you don't have to stay on the pump forever for the rest of your life.
No.
You have to take your insulin. There are different ways to take your insulin. But if you need a break, sometimes that just alleviates all this burden that comes with having to manage it.
Yeah. Ugh, well, I'm like so happy that you came on. I'm so bummed because our time is coming to a close, which is always a sad time. But we do have a question of the pod, and it's, what is your biggest diabetes complication fear? Like, which one is the biggest fear for you? So, Dobie, do you have one?
All of them. I'm sorry. I can't pick. They all frighten me.
All of them. I'm so scared of life.
Blindness, I think. I'm a big reader, and I think if I couldn't read, that would be a big thing for me. But I don't want to trade it. Okay, you can have your eyesight, but we'll give you, dialysis as a trade-off.
Yeah.
That would be bad too.
Sandra, what would scare you the most?
I think the same would be blindness, because I am a very perception sensory type of person. And this is not to minimize the other complications, but I think my eyesight leaving, I love looking at my family and my friends, and that would be different.
Yeah, I would say probably either amputation or blindness as well. But
hopefully we don't have to choose.
I know that's the goal here. So if you guys want to share your responses to that question, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at JustMyTypePod _, Facebook at JustMyTypePod, and our hashtag JustMyTypePod. Sandra, we can find you on Instagram at Dr.Sandra Sobel, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, yes. And also your website, correct? Which is summonhealth.com.
Summonhealth.com. Yes, please feel free to reach out. And I'm so excited. Thank you once again for having me on. This has been great.
Thanks for coming on. It was so much fun.
We do appreciate it. Thanks for listening to everybody that did. Thank you to our pod squad, Queen Elizabeth behind the scenes, making it all happen. Also, Zach, our intern, and Sami. It's time once again to put the sugar-free cherry on the healthy sundae.
C'est la vie, baby.
This is the Just My Type podcast.